Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we have from Sleater-Kinney Little Rope. So I was very close to just ignoring or vetoing this album from my schedule. The ugly circumstances around Janet Weiss's exodus from this band, coupled with the truly mediocre Path of Wellness in 2021, which I didn't really like at the time, and it's really aged badly. All of this has really soured me on this version of Sleater-Kinney. But hey, I figured I'd give this a shot. They brought in John Congleton to produce. It's only just over a half hour long. If it was boring, I'd veto it, and I'm fairly certain nobody would notice nor care. But that's not really what happened, because while Path of Wellness was dull and kind of thematically offensive to me, Little Rope is a mess, where it feels like the only reason establishment critics are giving this any grace is because it's Sleater-Kinney. They're legends, and yet since this band burned the majority of my goodwill last time, I'm a bit less willing to be generous. For starters, this might be the worst production job John Congleton has delivered in years, if not his career. It reminds me way too much of when Dave Fridman tries to flesh out a mix with texture and winds up bricking it. But you know what? At least he can deliver some credible psychedelic atmosphere, whereas here, I'm left wondering if Congleton was reusing a bunch of presets from the self-titled St. Vincent sessions from 2014 with no tightness nor groove, not helped by there being no bass guitar on this album, and the down-tuned guitar isn't really filling in those gaps this time. But then I remember the connection that Annie Clark has with Carrie Brownstein. It starts making a bit more sense. But you know what? For as wonky as that self-titled St. Vincent album was, it always felt like there was an alien purpose to some of those warped choices. It didn't have guitar tunings, and the synths sound like so much splattered, oily, atonal vomit all over a claustrophobic mix with a bizarre amount of hard panned guitars to the left or the right that somehow still manages to have airless, chalky session drum work with little tangible impact. Now look, I'm willing to accept all of that. It's an intentional pivot to sound more abrasive or challenging, an oppressively loud project that's more noise rock than nervy post-punk, a pivot where the distortion and all the contorted textures that saturate the mix, maybe it's part of the point, something closer to like Sonic Youth. After all, I was the one who said that I wanted a greater sense of tension coming after Path of Wellness, but compared to the tension that comes through tempo or ragged intensity, where the performance has real electricity and Sleater-Kinney used to excel even at their sloppiest, this is a lot closer to the tension that comes with a cluster migraine, where all the tones are flat and at wildly inconsistent dynamic levels at that, when they're not swallowed up in formless, overcompressed texture, and the vocals from Brownstein and Tucker barely even grab my attention if you can hear them at all. And to be blunt, on a compositional level, this album doesn't really sound like it's trying to alienate or throw their audience. There's kind of hooks here, and Sleater-Kinney have their difficult albums like The Woods. This feels more like the blocky transitions, The Worst Coming on Hell, or that anticlimactic key change on the final hook of Don't Feel Right, or the runoff of bad synth and guitar tunings are all jammed in because at least they're ideas that are attached to conventional structures, where if there is self-awareness, it's trying to force a compelling mess rather than coming to it more naturally. See also The Woods. And yet with all of that, there's a part of me that still wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt when it came to the content. Brownstein's mother and stepfather had died in a car accident in late 2022 when half the songs had already been written. Reportedly, this project was exploring grief, a balance of personal tragedy in an overwhelming world in crisis. I get that, and I can imagine how this sound might make sense in that sort of thematic context. And to their credit, I think the writing kind of gets there. So much of this record feels like a trauma response, where in the face of endings and calamities that we can't control in the larger world that might just normalize all of it, where you can feel simultaneously invisible, marginalized, and hunted by both external and internal pressures, especially for them as women, where there can be a desperate plea for outward acceptance despite how this has affected them, where even the stripped down mundanity of some of the writing, it kind of makes sense in that claustrophobic context. There is an emotional truth here. And you know, I get how this could work for Sleater-Kinney, because both Home Is Where and Svalbard, they tackled similar themes just last year with great success. On paper, it all makes sense. This is easy to defend. In other words, I think the saint that we should be talking about, it's not St. Vincent, it's St. anger. And there's honestly a shocking number of parallels. The atrocious production where the rawness feels very overthought, the drums that sound like ass, the vocal mixing that's haphazard, the grooves that are non-existent. And yet when you hear that Sleater-Kinney were wondering if they were even gonna make another album after Path of Wellness, there is an element of this that's feeling more therapeutic for the band themselves to get something out. Keep the band going a little longer. Now look, I don't make that comparison lightly, it's loaded, and Little Rope as a whole, of course it's better than St. Anger. For one, it's nowhere near as long, and there's a couple melodic hooks that I can imagine working live when the production doesn't ruin them, like on Say It Like You Mean It, or Untidy Creature, which is a good closer. And again, I know there is an audience that will give this a pass or even defend it. I just can't. It doesn't feel experimental when John Congleton did this better a decade ago. Hell, you know what? Sleater-Kinney did it better with The Woods, and Little Rope can't approach that. Even if I respect what they're trying to do, and I kind of feel terrible for ripping into it this much, sonically this is one of the worst records I have covered in some time. For everyone's sake, just skip it. Please. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I can't imagine you'd want to, but if you want to like or subscribe or drop comments or share this around, I'd be grateful. Look, I didn't want to come at Sleater-Kinney this hard. Again, they are legends in punk rock and Riot Grrl, and again, I like a lot of albums in their catalog. I've reviewed No Cities to Love. It was one of my favorite albums of that year. Going back to it, probably should have been higher on that year-end list. But as it is right now, it doesn't work. Like, I understand what it was trying to do. I get those who would defend it. I kind of respect it, but man, I don't want to listen to it. I just don't, and that's the thing that breaks my heart about this, because of course I don't want to pile on here, and this is just my interpretation. I understand that, but again, this did not work at all. But hey, if you want to argue with me more directly beyond the comments section, the link to my Patreon is right over there. Get access to my Discord server, or get albums onto my schedule you think I might like more. Again, I don't feel good for doing this. I wanted to like this album. I wanted to give it all the chances in the world, and yeah, it's not there. Sorry. But until then, I'm Mark. You're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.